Good evening and welcome very, very much to Conversations, where I'm pleased to welcome two gentlemen that represent the Communications Coordinating Committee for the United Nations, one of the very first non-governmental organizations or NGOs at the UN. And if I may, I'd like to introduce the two guests, get into the conversation. They're two very, very interesting people with a great deal to say. And on my far left is John Eger, and John Eger is the director of the Symphony Orchestra of the United Nations and is the chairman, current chairman of the committee. And John Eger, welcome very, very much to Conversation.
Thank you. My name is Joseph Eger.
Joseph Eger. I'm terribly sorry. Joseph Joe Eger, who is, of course, in that position, and sorry about that.
Right.
And on my immediate left is Dr. Harry Lerner, who is the president of the organization. And Dr. Lerner, welcome very, very much to Conversations. Wonder if you might, we want to talk about the contemporary situation. We're here in early February 1991, but we did want to get your giving us a little background about the CCCUN, if you could, Dr. Lerner. It's one of the very earliest, if not the earliest, NGO at the United Nations, and then from that perspective we could talk about the communications responsibility the committee feels, and which is incumbent upon all of us to try and understand events better.
Yes, the Communication Coordination Committee began about 44 years ago, one of the first at the United Nations, and originally was called the Speakers Research Committee for the UN. At that time it was primarily a lecture bureau with academics and journalists, people who try to get the message about the UN out to the public. And over the years it has changed its nature and brought into membership quite a few of the other forms of communication, such as television and computers and the modern and the traditional, you might say.
Have to move fast to keep up with all those developments. Things are moving so quickly now.
Definitely. The organization, which was originally founded by an ambassador to Denmark from the United States, Mrs. Rhodey, and Sean McBride, the Nobel and Lenin Peace Prize laureate, has enjoyed a very, let's say, stimulating career, you might say.
Yes.
It has included activities such as programs in the UN for events at the UN, involving Communications Year, International Year of Peace, the various environment and disarmament and development celebrations and activities, and has had among its speakers in the past Margaret Mead and Buckminster Fuller, Nobel laureates, etc. Currently, it's putting out a newsletter for the NGO community, the non-governmental organization.
Yeah, you might. While you keep talking, we might show that. Yeah, this is the newsletter, but you keep on talking.
And featured in the newsletter are articles, think pieces from around the world and here at the UN. For example, the current one has a piece called The Ecological Imperative by Mikhail Gorbachev, in which he includes 2 years ago, in which he includes a plea for the cessation of testing of nuclear weapons.
Amen.
I don't know how much more you want me to give you on the background.
And it's a communications. It has a particular charge in terms of helping to communicate and have people understand better the United Nations. And it's interesting that we want to understand the United Nations as it evolves and changes, and the kinds of transformations that might be going on within it, and might possibly even be encouraged within it as well. I know you've been interested in some transformation changes in terms of the way the United Nations functions.
Right. Well, the CCCUN, which is the Communication Coordination Committee, has been involved in sponsoring activities of many other non-governmental organizations in a sort of a coalition or umbrella sense. Currently, we are stimulating the formation of a non-governmental organization at headquarters on the environment.
Yeah. And
just last week we had an important meeting, examining the steps to Brazil 1992. Right. We also were involved in developing and organizing the first conference on a more democratic United Nations.
That's interesting.
That was last October for 3 days, and it brought together authorities from around the earth, China, Japan, India, and of course Europe and the United States, to examine how the UN could be reformed to meet the challenges of the present, and without modifying the charter, amending the charter, still introduce improvements such as the UN Second Assembly, People's House.
Yeah, that would be a big step in and of itself. Times change, the situation changes. There is a great deal of, particularly among members of the General Assembly, I think there's probably some discontent with the way decision-making takes place, and there's going to be people questioning, particularly, of course, all the world is focused on the Gulf situation now, the way in which the United Nations came to support what's going on now. I wonder maybe you could talk a little about that, if you could, Joe.
Surely.
About the role of the United Nations in terms of these events that are transpiring, these monumental events that are transpiring in terms of the Gulf.
Well, the way I see it, the UN is changing rapidly today. The perception is that the United Nations sanctioned the military eventualities in the Middle East today.
12 resolutions.
That's right. However, that was the Security Council only, and there is a perception that the most powerful member, the one that gives the most money or should be paying its dues for the most money, sort of browbeat some of the nations on that Security Council. So there is a certain amount of dismay on the part of the General Assembly where most of the nations are involved. Security Council only has, what, 11 nations, 15 nations, whereas the General Assembly has the other 140-odd nations.
And of course it has the 5 permanent members with the veto.
That's right.
People in the General Assembly wonder about that, I guess.
Exactly.
That's one question.
So there is some dismay on the part of many of the nations about the way things are moving in the Middle East today. Also, the United Nations itself, the Secretariat, is showing much interest in something that Harry has been very involved in, and I am now more involved in, namely a People's Assembly, which would be run concurrent with the General Assembly. In other words, General Assembly is an assembly of nations.
Yes. And
this sister assembly would be an assembly of peoples, so that there would be a larger voice on the part of people. And much to my interest and somewhat surprise, the UN is encouraging this development because it is really supportive, because NGOs, non-governmental organizations like ours, does tend to support the United Nations in its efforts.
Yeah. Do you think there's a general perception among members of the General Assembly that the decision-making and the power that there is that the United Nations has, there's been complaints over the years that they don't have enforcement power, the United Nations, in a world of sovereign states and so forth, still resides at the national level. But there's complaints on the part of some of the smaller nations that the decision-making and the ability for the more powerful, the rich, the well-endowed, to dominate events in a way that is not equitable, as it were. But this is a complaint you hear among many members of the UN?
I think that's quite right.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the UN is a forum, at least, for the smallest nations as well as the large nations. Unfortunately, our media doesn't always report some of the statements that many of the smaller nations put out.
Yes.
So what you say is quite true.
Yeah. The world is not.
At the same time, there is the green helmets, the blue helmets, the UN peacekeeping forces.
They've done wonders in some cases.
They really have.
Won the Nobel Prize recently. Yeah.
Well, they really have. And of course it requires the agreement of the nations that they be sent to a place. And in fact, recently our organization and many organizations have come together with a resolution calling for the introduction of blue helmets, the UN peacekeeping forces, into the Middle East instead of the military forces now engaged there.
That seems to be part of it. If there is to be some sort of a solution, these are dark days in a certain sense because the war goes on, or at least the bombing goes on, a very one-sided kind of thing that's seen by many people in the world. There's demonstrations against it, and there's all kinds of ecological disaster that is occurring. But if there is a component of what might be a peacekeeping capability or a peaceful resolution to this, many of the resolutions that are being floated or brought up by peoples involve the intervention of the blue helmets.
Yes, indeed.
You think is a primary factor.
Yes,
that
very
might
much.
be able to intervene between these intervening forces. Harry, I think, wanted to say something.
Yes.
A couple of things that would say to you.
Well, I'm a psychologist, you know.
Yes.
And yet I'm more interested in prevention than I am in treatment, and have devoted the last 30 or some odd years to community organization, international organization, et cetera, designed to prevent the breakdown of relations between nations, and community breakdown and family breakdown, resulting in individual difficulties.
Must have been a discouraging time for you.
Well, so again, in the case of the United Nations, we have to plan ahead to prevent difficulties such as we have been facing today. And thoughts along those lines include the development of an International Criminal Court of Justice, which would permit, let's say, examination of the claims and the crimes of heads of state, as well as terrorists and hijackers and the like, which could be a deterrent factor in preventing aggression, and therefore, as in the case of the Nuremberg tribunal experience, provide for international laws which could be enforced.
Are you encouraged by the body of international law, or the acceptance of a body of international law through time, let's say from Nuremberg and forward, and the Human Rights Court in Strasbourg and so forth?
Yeah, every treaty agreed to, including the Charter, is a form of international law.
Indeed.
I would be happier if the nations implemented some of these provisions, like the World Court, for example,
right,
which should be exercising in the conflict between Kuwait and Iraq.
I think Harold Stassen has suggested
Has suggested, yes, that be an action before the other form of military action.
Yeah, you need the compliance of both parties for that.
Right.
And there are limitations.
And also that there should be a mandatory submission for adjudication instead of a voluntary one.
What do we say if we look at this? We're here from the United States, the most powerful nation in the world. In fact, some see the United States with the difficulties of the Soviet Union and the events of the last year emerging as the superpower in the world, in a certain sense of being able to project power. What do we say to some of the smaller nations of the world who would say that an international law is not enough just to have international law? We must have just and equitable international law where all are equal before it. And when we look at the bombing or the mining of Nicaragua, and we look at the cases where the United States has violated international law, for instance, a powerful nation, in the invasion of Panama, in the invasion of Grenada, in the mining of the harbors of Nicaragua, and the smaller peoples or the smaller nations of the world will say law is not appropriate if there's not a measure of equity and justice within the law. It is only just a codification of the strong over the weak. What do we say to people like that?
Absolutely. My organization, the Symphony for the United Nations, put on a Middle East festival several years ago at Lincoln Center. We had 3 days of all of the arts, music and dance and theater and film, and an art exhibition and a outdoor bazaar at Lincoln Center. And we had a seminar entitled Rehearsals in Communication. And we couldn't call it peace. We couldn't use the word peace because some parts of the world felt that peace is not enough. It needs peace with justice.
Yes.
And to use that expression would have alienated others. So we simply titled this Rehearsals in Communication.
I see.
As a result, we brought over members of the Knesset. We had high-level Arabs, including Clovis Maqsood, the head of the Arab League, and other high-level Arab people from all over the world. And in the atmosphere of the arts, where there was mutual respect,
yes,
we dealt with very serious substantive issues, and people came together and talked in a human fashion as they would not have otherwise in some more formal surroundings. Very recently, one of our board members of the Symphony for the United Nations, Mrs. Mary Ewald, had a son who was one of the hostages, early hostages of Iraq in this war. And she wrote a letter to Saddam Hussein in which she was very respectful of the Arab peoples, and she was not humiliating him, as too many of our leaders have done, I'm afraid.
Indeed.
And as a result, her son was back in a week. And to me, I think that is the only chance for world peace, namely respect for other peoples.
Dialogue rather than ultimatums.
Absolutely. And we have been humiliating and doing worse than that. We've been brutalizing peoples from all over the world, in Central and South America, in the Middle East, the Palestinian people, I'm afraid, and other peoples. And you commit one act, and you sow hatred and anger, and so you get a return act.
And a disrespect for the concept of law itself.
Absolutely. So what you say is quite true, in my opinion, that law is not enough, because there are so many ways of bending the law in the favor of the powerful.
Yeah, it's just seen as a thing that enforces the prerogatives of the rich and wealthy and powerful of the world.
The status quo.
Probably throughout so much of the human history that was the case, that the law was there to protect the rich and powerful and didn't particularly serve equity.
I'm afraid it still does to too large a degree.
Too large a degree.
It serves the status quo.
Yeah, and that might be perhaps an inappropriate kind of that might be an inappropriate kind of situation that we confront here on a world scale.
Well,
yeah, go ahead, Harry. Sure, sorry.
In response to your question, all the things you say are certainly accurate and inspiring, indeed. Kinds of things you've contributed in terms of your organization and yourself. And I gather you're going to be doing more of the same in the near future.
We are.
But the law that we were considering was the law to prevent war, to deal with it if it should begin to occur. And courts are needed in order to implement that. And we don't have that at this point. But on a more fundamental level, in terms of preventing the disputes and the injustice which contributes to violence, we have to be thinking about democratic representation of the people as people around the world, rather than simply represented through their governments, which very often do not reflect the needs and wishes of the population, but rather of the dominating groups.
Probably true of practically all the governments of the world, that the decision-making, the power, the possession of the capital assets, the power base, is probably very narrowly held in relatively few hands in all of the countries of the world, including our own.
Yes, and even in the Soviet Union, the need for land reform, which would have solved many of the problems which are now emerging, well, was evident. That need was evident to some.
Right. It hasn't perhaps they're having difficulty, tremendous difficulty there, but it hasn't been seen. So that Mr. Bush, our president of the United States, talks of a new world order. There are probably many people who feel we need a new world order, but there's a question of equity that Mrs. Roosevelt had to deal with the Soviets when they were doing the International Declaration of Human Rights, the Universal Declaration. The Soviets were always arguing that we need to talk some of these economic and equity issues.
A balance between the political, social, and economic.
The first statement of the United Nations itself in the Charter is to try and save mankind from the scourge of war. And Joseph, you have a statement or something that's been, in a sense, in a rough working kind of way, been put together by a number of people that I think the committee
endorsed.
Has, in a sense, endorsed. Maybe it's worthwhile if maybe it's relatively brief. Maybe you could read it.
I'll just speak of the salient points.
Understand that it's being changed and so forth. But
yes. Well, many organizations have been involved in putting this together, and it says the UN has failed to resolve the Middle East crisis. Instead of holding to the first tenet of the UN Charter to maintain international peace and security, it has virtually sanctioned this horrible war. If the UN is to truly accomplish the goals for which it was established, non-military strategies for conflict resolution must be adopted. We want to create a new structure to develop mediation teams, to facilitate dialogues between all concerned parties, and thus provide ways of dealing more effectively with international conflicts such as the Persian Gulf crisis. The UN's voting process needs to be democratized so that, among other things, size and/or military might do not always carry the vote. And then it calls for immediate ceasefire, it calls for blue helmets, the UN peacekeeping forces to stabilize the present crisis. I was just noticing something in the television just yesterday that a friend of mine, Sari Nusseibeh, a Palestinian leader, was put in detention. Well, he is, I know to be, he's a very moderate Palestinian. I happen to be Jewish, and I have family in Israel, so I'm concerned about Israel very much. But I also am concerned that some of the policies are leading to destruction. Well, there's an opinion that was expressed fairly widely, I think in the New York Times, that Sari Nusseibeh has been put away because he was for peace and moderation, and that some people in the Israeli government really do not want to have any moderate Palestinian leaders with whom they could deal, because they really do not want a peace settlement with the Palestinians.
Yeah, they want to. Yeah, right. That's the right-wing forces. That's the right term.
That's right.
Seem to be in the saddle these days.
They seem to be, yes.
Yeah.
And I personally am at great grief about this, because I think they're in the process of destroying not only Israel, but I think they're contributing to international anti-Semitism.
Certainly anti-Zionism.
Anti-Zionism. And I'm afraid that it's a short step to anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And I would wish that the real peace forces in Israel would be working with the real peace forces in the United States to stop this war entirely.
That does not seem to be the case at the moment. In fact, it just seems to be the four horsemen are galloping.
It seems so.
That way now. And the long-term implications of this are, they just had a 300,000 member demonstration in Rabat, from Morocco all the way from Malaysia. There have been things that have been occurring, and there is now cavalierly being discussed, it seems to me, if I may say so, by people in high positions of responsibility. Mr. Cheney, the Vice President of the United States, are cavalierly discussing, or not just out of hand dismissing, the idea of tactical nuclear weapons.
Indeed.
It begins to become terribly frightening as the animosity and the hatred begins to build. It's a very, very difficult and a very frightening situation.
It is, and in my opinion, the only answer is for peoples to express their feelings. I don't believe the large number of the statistics about the people are for the war. I think people are largely against the war all over the world, and in this country as well.
Certainly around the world. In this country, there seems to be a wave of patriotism and high approval ratings for the president, and it's almost like the hometown rooting for the football
Well,
team.
let's call it false patriotism, and I think they want to support our boys, and as do I. And I think the best way to support them is to bring them home. And an evidence of the international feeling about this, I've been contacted recently about doing a peace cruise in the Middle East, and the Soviets are providing a cruiser, which will be fitted up for concerts and
a cruise ship, like
a cruise ship, which will a cruiser, which will be
a military cruiser.
A military cruiser.
Oh, a military cruiser,
right, which will be able to go through the waters of the Middle East on various peace events.
Similar to the Volga trip, which they had every summer.
Yeah, they have a peace oriented kind of thing.
Yeah.
There are many peace organizations and so forth. The committee on communication,
the Communication Coordination Committee.
Coordination Committee. There are differences of opinion among the people in the organization.
Well, it's a democratic organization, and incidentally, let me pick up on that to expand a bit. We are dealing with a historical process in which injustices have been retaliated, have been engendering more injustices, so to speak, going back to before World War I. And it's kind of hard to look at the situation and be objective. We are not the world court. And obviously, we're all expressing our own sentiments, our own feelings, our own perception of the situation. But to get at the preventive level again, if we were to reconstitute the UN and have this People's Assembly that we mentioned before, the second house or second assembly, the election of delegates would be democratic in each part of the world, regional selection, and the technique or the method that I'm recommending as one of the founders of the International Network for a UN Second Assembly of over 100 organizations around the earth, is to form in every community a coordinating council, which would meet monthly or so, and consist of representatives of the local branches of the non-governmental organizations, the NGOs, as well as community-based organizations not affiliated with the UN. They would be addressing local and regional problems, in the course of that selecting their best qualified people who could speak as world citizens, not simply citizens of a particular government, and send them to the UN and be the channel whereby the voice of and wisdom of the people could be heard around the world.
Would they have power? Would they have any power?
The Second Assembly would be initially a matter of recommendations to the General Assembly and to the specialized agencies and the Secretariat. But in the history of human events, we see that such institutions evolve, like the House of Commons in England and our own House of Representatives. A short period of time with modern communication, we can see that becoming a much more influential force, particularly because the people of the world would be watching. Their representatives would be either successful or unsuccessful. If they were not successful, if the governments were not responsive, then the people would be knowledgeable enough to change the representation of their own governments.
So we'd have a problem then with the Second Assembly if the power still resides all within the structure of the organization as it is. The electronic media is one way
of the UN
of the
structure.
UN, yeah, of the UN structure.
Well,
and, the electronic media could help extend the perceptions of other groups. Right?
Yes, the impact of public opinion growing out of the actual involvement of local citizenry in their problem solving regionally and relating the local and regional to the national and the global would be a way of not only influencing their representatives that they've elected to send to the UN Second Assembly, but also their governmental leaders.
Right. That is all to the good, to be able to bring a sense and to alleviate perhaps some sense of alienation on the people, part of people who feel left out by the decision-making process
and
currently.
Impotence, right.
Yeah, in the sense of that. There are many people who felt that that's something that we probably need at a governmental level within the various functionings of our various societies, maybe even including the United States as well. There was a tremendous amount of, you said earlier, Joseph, Eger, that you felt that there were a great number of people, the patriotism that was being exerted is perhaps overrated or overstated for propagandistic purposes and so forth. There certainly was a great deal of opposition within the Senate and within the House. Many people, Mr. Biden and others, wanted sanctions to be given a chance. 7 defense secretaries were against the idea of going in as we did and so forth. There was a great deal of opposition. War came, and suddenly that all seems to have put a lid on that. But like a pressure cooker, that feeling still must be there among people within the United States, don't you think?
Well, there's nothing wrong with patriotism. I feel that I'm a patriot. And I think that people certainly want to support their sons in the war. And as I said, support them by bringing them home. I think that the real test of patriotism is what you do for the peoples of the country. And I feel that there are people in our administration in top offices who are doing destructive things to the American people. First of all, by taking us into this war, then by taking many, many billions of our dollars for the SNL crisis, for example. And there are two sons now of our president who are involved in very questionable matters. And to me, these people who are making great profits out of the war are not true patriots. The true patriots are the people who sacrifice. I think that a homeless person is no less patriotic than the military-industrial complex.
Right.
And what Harry was saying about People's Assembly, the peoples in power know the power of public opinion.
Yeah.
And it's about time that the public utilize public opinion.
Well, they've been led around. Somebody said the media can lead them around like a bull with a ring in its nose can lead public opinion around by the media. So the media attitude and the electronic attitude, the the electronic media particularly has been playing it up with this, perhaps trying to win a very quick victory and to get the surge of patriotism going. We want to follow up this interview with you gentlemen with some people who are talking about people who feel as though that has gone to greater lengths than it ought to have, the propagandistic pattern of the reporting of the war here as far as the United States is concerned. And I'm sorry, there are many, many issues we could talk about, but we wanted to just touch the surface of many that you're both involved with, and I'd like to thank you very, very much for coming in.
Would you like to have the address of the organization?
Yeah, sure. Let's quickly give the address.
Yes. It's 301 East 45th Street, New York, New York, 10017, and it's the CCC-UN, and if you want more information about our activities, write to us.
All right, very good. You heard it here. You can. We'll put up a slate so people can see that. It's been your pleasure in the cable audience to have the perception of my immediate left of Dr. Harry Lerner. He's the current president of the Communications Coordinating Committee of the United Nations. And on my far left is Joe Eger. He is the director of the Symphony Orchestra of the United Nations and is chairman of the organization.
Symphony for United Nations.
Symphony for
United Nations and CCC for the UN.
For the UN.
Not our,
okay.
for.
Okay, very good. You're right. That does make a distinction.
Right.
Words do matter. Right.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for coming in. And we invite you to stay tuned. There'll be more coming up in the general topic area momentarily. That's it for this particular segment. And once again, gentlemen, thank you very, very much indeed. Please stay tuned. We'll be coming right back. Welcome to this segment of our conversation. We're pleased to welcome to the program two people who have been involved with the coverage, the media coverage of the situation in the Gulf. If I could, I'd like to introduce them, get right into a discussion. And on my far left is Tiffany Devitt. She is with the Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. And Tiffany, welcome very, very much to Conversations. On my immediate left is Simone Farkhondeh, who has been one of the spark plugs behind, as it were, and one of the group involved with the Paper Tiger, Deep Dish, Gulf Media project that's been so very successful in terms of bringing an alternative view, is wrapped up in that. And both of the two have been involved in the protest that's been going on in terms of the propagandistic media coverage of the war up until now. And ladies, welcome very, very much to Conversation. Why don't you talk a little bit about the outset here, because many people in the audience will be familiar with this, maybe just real briefly, Paper Tiger, and then secondly, tie it into the four-part series that was carried at a number of public television stations and that sort of thing, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay. Well, Paper Tiger is a New York-based collective, and what we do is we make a video collective, yes. And we make a half-an-hour program every week critiquing all aspects of the media. We started out in '81 looking at the New York Times, and then from there we went and started looking at many other media products. And what we do is we look behind the scenes. We look at who produces these, for who are they made, and what kind of propaganda and what kind of ideologies do these media products represent. So that's what we've been doing for the past 10 years. And we've also created Deep Dish, which is a satellite network, which is a sort of an information network for alternative groups all over the country. And in September, when this whole crisis, August, September, when this whole crisis started happening, Paper Tiger quickly did 2 half-an-hour tapes because we realized that the media really wasn't giving any historical background to the issue, wasn't giving any voice to Arab Americans or Arabs in the Middle East about what they really felt about what went on. So we felt we needed to be present and show that other view.
Try to counterbalance.
Exactly, try to counterbalance the commercial media. So we made 2 half-an-hour programs, and then we decided, well, we should do something more than that. And we got together with Deep Dish, and we created the Gulf Crisis TV Project, which is a 2-hour program, 4 half-an-hours, looking at the different aspects that are involved around this issue. So we looked at the history of American intervention in the Middle East. We looked at the U.S. oil policy, or the lack of it, of an environmental policy. We looked at how to be a war resistor legally. We felt that a lot of reservists are out there who really don't want to go to this war, who don't believe in it, and they need to know legally how to you know, how to
Eric
prevent
Larson and
themselves.
all these people, and
Yeah.
some of them have actually, yeah, right.
And Jeff Patterson.
Yeah,
and,
Jeff.
Renaud Jean-Baptiste and many others.
Yeah.
So that's what we did. We made
And
it
that was very successful, and it was carried here in 13. Many people would have seen it on the over-the-air television networks
Yes,
and so forth, and it was and picked up around the country, right?
Yeah, well, apparently people realized very quickly that there was such a lack of media coverage of the anti-war movement that was developing. So we got to put the tape on PBS stations throughout the country. 26 PBS stations picked it up,
Great.
including 13 and WYB in Philadelphia, and about up to 200 cable stations throughout the country picked it up.
Have carried that maybe even numerous times, even, yeah?
Yes, yes.
To bring some sort of a countervailing balance to all of this coverage. And you're both involved in something that is now trying to protest the propagandistic nature of the reporting on the war. I think you call it this Desert Storm. You're calling Storming the Desert Storm or something?
Well, we call it the Operation Media.
Storm the Media.
Storm the Media, yeah, Storm the Media. And I wonder, but before we have some footage of that, but maybe you talk real quickly, if you could, Tiffany, about FAIR, okay?
Okay. FAIR's a media watch group based in New York City, and like Paper Tiger, we're concerned with the inadequacy of mainstream media coverage. Specifically, we address it by doing a lot of studies targeted at specific shows, like McNeil Lehrer and Nightline, were our two major studies documenting the pro-corporate, pro-establishment tilt of those shows. We also, on an ongoing basis, we have a publication extra which is devoted to reporting censored stories, to showing stories of disinformation, instances of disinformation. And on the issue of the Gulf, like Paper Tiger, we've done a lot of work as far as trying to put this in a historical context and criticize the media for ways in which they're falling short of their professional commitment. And since our aims are pretty compatible and obviously very complementary, Paper Tiger and FAIR recently got together and sponsored a march, a rally that was aimed at targeting the TV networks. And it was a huge turnout. It was really wonderful.
Yeah, it was just, we're talking now February, I guess, 3rd or 4th of '91. That was just last Wednesday here in New York. And you actually went out and marched to the various network headquarters and so forth.
Yeah.
And set it up for us. Look, we have a piece of tape of it.
Well, we had approximately, the police estimates were that there are 2,000 people who turned out. And we went to ABC, CBS, NBC, as well as Channel 13, the PBS affiliate in New York City. And specifically, as far as what we're protesting, the first thing we're protesting was the overall marginalization of the peace movement. FAIR conducted a study during the first 5 months of the conflict from August to, I think, January 3rd.
Yeah.
And what we found was that in spite of the fact that there's widespread opposition to this war, I believe at the beginning period it was almost evenly divided between people who supported the war and people who didn't support the war. And nonetheless, out of the total TV network coverage of the Gulf, 1% was devoted to opposition activity. Since
Is this after the war started?
no, this is from January. This is from August to January 1st.
Really, that's small.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, 1%. And subsequent to the outbreak of the war, you know, we've been continuing to look at the coverage, and what we found is that obviously, with hundreds of thousands of people turning out on the street, you're getting a bit more coverage, but nonetheless, what you see in terms of the coverage on the network station is you see a blur of street action. Still missing is the presence of foreign policy experts associated with the peace movement or policy critics as experts in the studios.
Yeah, very little of that. We did get a flurry of that after the effort. It was a defensive build-up, supposedly, and then after November 6th, it became offensive. Yeah. Obviously so. Mr. Biden in the Senate, it was a great debate. 7 ex-defense ministers or secretaries of defense came on to say we should let sanctions work. They were taking this more peaceful approach. Yeah. And then once the war was announced, that seems to have been just all cut off. It must be a surprise for you as younger people, as it would be, to find such a propaganda apparatus that is so actively in place. I find it surprising myself how much they've been able to stifle the media. I'm older, I've been around longer, but I've never seen anything quite like it in myself. They did. Brian Lamb and C-SPAN did carry the demonstration last Saturday, but by and large they've been showing people waving the flag, and they're trying to just very quickly instill in the American people this propagandistic, xenophobic kind of furor, don't you think?
It is disturbing.
It's being manipulated, public opinion. Yeah.
What I find, I don't know about you, but what I find even more shocking is the fact that there's so little resistance on the part of the mainstream media outlets to Pentagon censorship. And as I look at the news each night, it seems to me that the anchormen and news producers are acting at best like Pentagon stenographers and at worst like wartime cheerleaders. And you might know that the Center for Constitutional Rights and a number of alternative media outlets have brought a suit against the Pentagon to resist Pentagon restrictions, and the mainstream media has failed to report on that suit, they failed to join it, and they failed to bring one of their own, which is to me more shocking.
Yeah, it is.
I think that, go ahead. It needs to be pointed out that it's not that shocking. It's consistent. It's a consistent. I mean, look at the Iran-Contra affair, which is not so long ago, and really the public didn't know about it. They should have known about it, and if they had, we wouldn't have Bush in office today. So I think it's consistent, but it is very extreme.
But it's reached a new extreme. Well, I wonder, we do have a clip here that we want to show of that demonstration last Wednesday. It would have been what, the 30th, you say? January 30 here in New York. So why don't we set up that tape, run it, and we'll come back and wind this up then again. So let's set that tape up, run it in the studio now then, please. And this is a demonstration, what do you call it again? Storming the media.
Operation Storm the Media. Storm
the Media, okay. And this took place in New York on January 30, right? Okay, run that tape now then, please. Thank you.
Okay. Do you want to use on the sidewalk with just observers. We're asking, what do you think of the news coverage of the war? Okay, but it's just because we didn't have any light and we do it. We got a few.
And so we're here to counter that kind of misinformation and to show people on these streets that they can make their own video too. They don't have to depend on the major news. They don't have to depend on, you know, corporate sponsored news where you got NBC owned by GE and stuff like this, major defense contractors, that they don't have to depend on people like that for their information, that they can go out and they can make their own news and try to empower themselves that way.
Okay, and what do you think?
Oh, I'm Jim White and from New York City, and I think that the media is not giving us all the information that we need about the war. They've been unfair. I think the CIA is cover up, and the truth about the war, I think, will never be given to American people.
What do you think about it?
No comment.
No comment.
What do you think they could do better?
Tell the truth. I mean, we should, well, maybe we should get together and have our own news media.
You have an event, they'll take it back.
I'm starting soon. I haven't yet.
Well, I feel it's been very sad, just appalling. The only saving note has been BAI and WNYC. And it's very, very sad.
How would you like to see them?
Well, I think actually I think CNN is making an effort, but I think it goes back to August. Nobody really was talking about what should be being done to lay the groundwork for peace instead of building toward war, instead of really moving toward war all along. And then it's been like one great big video game ever since the war began. Good luck.
Back again now. That was really impressive footage. Back again now with Simone and Tiffany. You say that this is something that's just been going on, but it has reached new dimensions in terms of the censorship. I wonder, Simone Farkhondeh, if I may say so. You're of Iranian background, and so you have an appreciation. Particularly, we just saw on the television yesterday there were 300,000 people demonstrating in Rabat. There are demonstrations sweeping throughout, particularly the masses of the Islamic world and so forth. The issue as it is being joined, it has a couple dimensions to it. One of it is with Israeli involvement, which is a long-term involvement between the Islamic, the Arab peoples, and Israel represented, in a certain sense, special ties to the United States and the West. And yet when we look, it must be in a certain sense, when you look at the media, it occurred to me the other day that there are no people, and this is an issue that's going to be with us for a long time into the future, a major watershed issue in terms of relating to the third world and the developing world, the Arabic world and the Israel and the United States. There are no Mohammeds. There are no Isfahans. There are no one at all in anchor or in any other even reporting field positions. And in fact, most of the people that are there, a great number of them are even, they're Jewish in terms of the people that are representing. It really is a one-sided presentation, and the presenters themselves, it really is a one-sided presentation that is just a consistent pattern. You, as someone who's appreciative of the nuance of Islamic feeling in this, must be sensitive to that over the longer haul, I would think.
Well, sure. I mean, it's very upsetting to see that, you know, a war is happening in the Middle East and you don't see any of the Middle Easterners actually telling you how they feel. I mean, all over the world, actually, there's been demonstrations against the war, and we don't hear it. But specifically in the Middle East, in Pakistan, in Jordan, in Yemen, I mean, Yemen even started before the war started. They were really trying to negotiate, to bring people to the negotiating table. We didn't hear about it. You know, Morocco, all over the Middle East, people are demonstrating and really don't want this war because they know what it means to them. They know that it means devastation for years to come, and we are not hearing that. And also Arab Americans. There's a crackdown, an FBI crackdown towards Arab Americans in these countries. I'm worried in this country.
Yeah.
I'm worried, but we're not hearing about it. You know, and that's very, very dangerous, very concerning.
Yeah, and there are, I mean, when I meant that, I mean among the producers, among the directors, among the field personnel, the field producers, the line producers, much less the on-camera personalities who give nuance to all of this. There is not a single Islamic representative among all of these people. There is a writer for the New York Times who's Islamic, but on the whole, they're all not only Americans, but also, in a certain sense, they're practically all Jewish. And this issue of Zionism and the relationship between Israel and the broader Islamic world is going to become a major defining issue. And do you understand what I'm saying? It is somehow you would think they would be able to find knowledgeable people who understand Islam to become part of the anchor makeup or the presentation of electronic media in this country. No? I don't know, maybe Tiffany could address it.
There's been concern with that issue for a long time. One of the things we addressed in our major studies was we looked at the demographics of who's represented on television. And what that we found was that 90% of the experts on, or so-called experts on television, are white male. And it's, as you say, this is something that's been happening in the media in an ongoing way, and it's highlighted in the context of the Gulf crisis. And the implications, as far as I can tell, for media coverage of the Gulf is that a couple things are happening. One is that Iraqis are sort of being dehumanized. And we're not hearing about the human costs of war. When you have two U.S., you know, a retired U.S. general debating a retired U.S. general with no Arab Americans on, no women on, no African Americans on, what you have happen is that people talk about how weapons are performing as opposed to the human costs.
There's no mention at all of the we talk and talk about how there have been some American servicemen that have been wounded, sad, unhappy. There's even been some people killed. But there's been no empathetic understanding of the terrible destruction that's being rained down in human terms upon the people of Iraq.
No one's asked why, in contravention to the Geneva Conventions, dams are being bombed, city water supplies are being bombed, Baghdad has no water now. And those are all things, those are civilian targets, those are things that affect civilians, and it's against international law to bomb them. But since there isn't a focus on human cost, those questions aren't even being raised. And there's also, I'd like to go a little bit into how the media is in fact fostering that racism at home as well. There's all these reports of how widespread organized terrorism is really imminent. And what that means at home is that it's sort of creating this public distrust of Arab Americans or Arabs at home and abroad with virtually no basis.
Well, the dehumanization, even the demonization of the Arab and Islamic people has been going on. You might be more aware of that, Simone, for a very, very long time within the media of the United States, and it's largely been where none of that takes place as far as Israel is concerned, or the things that they take place. There's a double standard. You said before that they have a general and a general talking about bomb ratios and throw rates and all that sort of thing. That's one thing well enough, but it's also the fact that the commentators and the anchor people are all white male, and they're all practically, to an incredible degree. In fact, it seems to me something that might be worth studying by FAIR, who measures these things. There's a preponderance of people of Jewish persuasion, and it's very difficult for people of Jewish persuasion to be objective in terms of a confrontation between Islamic forces and the State of Israel.
I tend to think that the source of that bias has more to do with anchor people and experts on television being pro-establishment and pro-government than Jewish. I would hesitate to point to their Jewishness.
I would
agree. Why would you hesitate to point to that?
Because I think that it spans. You see that kind of racism and that kind of anti-Arab sentiment among people who aren't Jewish. It's very, very widespread.
Well, okay, if you say so, but I mean, it seems to me it'd be something something well worth bringing up in view of the fact that the defining issue is likely to be for many months out that fact.
See, it's a very complicated issue. I mean, as you know, there's anti-Arab sentiment in this country. There's anti-Zionist sentiment and there's anti-Semitist sentiment, and I think it's difficult to say, oh, there's these Jewish anchors who are doing this or that. I think I would agree with you that they're a part of this establishment, and yes, the establishment, the government. I mean, we know support of Zionism in this country, financially and otherwise through the government. That's a clear fact, and that I think is more.
Well, okay, but I would say that if given this, again, I don't want to press it and everything, but it seems to me a study of who makes up the media, both at the line of producer, owners of the system, producers, line producers, who makes the decisions, the nuance of eye and body motion and that sort of thing, and the sentiments and the attitudes of the people who are on camera. I think it's important. It would be an issue that could be raised by FAIR Legitimate, even though it does seem to be sensitive. I don't think they should, if 6/10 of the people who were on camera were named Muhammad, then I think it would be brought up.
That's a different issue, because if 6/10 are called David, that's not so different than if 6/10 called Mike. You know what I mean? Is that I don't think that North American Jewish perspective is necessarily so different from the white Christian North American perspective.
You don't think so? You don't think there's a special attitude?
No, because again, it's
you don't think there's a special feeling among American Jewish people for the State of Israel and for the Zionist cause? And that's a factor in terms of news reporting?
There's also a lot of Israeli peace groups and American Jewish peace groups who are playing a really important, significant role in this conflict.
Well, okay. And anyway, you had something else you wanted to bring up, Simone.
No, I just wanted to say something is that, again, if it would be great to have Muhammad's and Fatima's behind the camera and
no, in front of the camera. I'm saying in front of the camera.
You're saying in front.
I'm talking about Ted Koppel. It's Larry King. It's Sonia Friedman. It's all Jewish people that are in front of the camera, reporting from Islamic places and so forth. You know. And I don't know that you can say, you may say that people can be totally objective. I'm not sure on that issue that there is total objectivity in terms of the people who make up the news media, in front and behind the camera. And it's something that FAIR could bring up. It seems to me, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong.
I think that even in a larger issue, if it weren't about Islam, it's the same situation. I mean, those people that are anchors, as you say, the same problem comes up when they cover Central America or Panama or Africa. You know, the problem is that they aren't asking those people who are from those countries. It's not just Islam and the Middle East. It's a general ignorance or not seeing the importance of asking really the people who are.
I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I really do think it makes a difference whether the reporting is done about the Middle East and involves Israel than if the reporting is done in Central America and involves Nicaragua. I think the difference there is a difference in terms of who the reporting is if the State of Israel is involved. And it seems to be an issue well worth raising. I'm sorry, I feel that way. But go ahead.
I was just going to say, in the case of the reporting on Panama, is very similar in its pro-war tilt. And there's a parallel where the question of Jewishness doesn't come into play.
Yeah.
And I think that's very compelling as far as illustrating that it has more to do with an individual or a media owner's relationship to the establishment than their personal religion or personal ethnic background.
Well, okay, yeah, and the establishment are the people who run the news, and they certainly should be critiqued. You had something you wanted to bring up about solidarity.
Just in terms of just a few numbers, if we are running out of time.
Yeah, very quickly, we only have a couple minutes.
I just want to say that there are, I mean, this is away from media, but there are, something the media isn't covering is that there is a way of legally war resist if you are a reservist or even a soldier. And I think that I'm going to take this opportunity to show this number. There's a group called War Resistance League, and they're offering free counseling and legal counseling for people who don't want to go. And another number for them is 228-0450.
That's the War Resistors League, yeah.
Yes.
They come up in your tape, right?
Yes, and another thing is that if people are interested to show the Gulf tapes in order to create teach-ins in the area, you can call us at 228-6370.
Okay, fine, and that's deep dish. One last word.
I'd like to make a closing comment, which is just to make a few suggestions as far as what people can do if they're upset about media coverage. And as individuals, some effective strategy is to write letters to the editor, encourage people to write letters to the editor, make phone calls to networks as soon as you see something that disturbs you, submit opinion pieces to dailies or to your local weeklies. Is a public interest group, it's also good to let all the media outlets around you know about scheduled events. In part, our event had such good press coverage because we let people know about it in
And if
advance.
they contact FAIR, you will let them know how they can conveniently get in touch with these media outlets.
Yeah, we can supply them numbers, addresses, things like that. Another thing is, just as a public interest group, to develop and to foster ongoing communications with reporters, journalists, anchor people, and producers in your area. And finally, I would say, most importantly probably, is to use alternative TV, alternative media as a source of alternative analysis, as a source of critiquing the mainstream press, and also to find out about what events are going on.
Okay, we'll put up signs so people can get in touch. Quickly,
I just
30
wanted to
seconds,
say
no more.
that people also should realize that they do have public access in their areas, which is a free facility to make your own TV, and also that the Gulf Crisis is continuing to do more tapes on the situation, alternative viewpoints. So stay tuned and ask your cable and PBS stations to show this.
Okay, if they're not going to give it there, we'll be able to build an alternate system.
I'd say if you want any more ideas as far as media activism, you can also call FAIR, which is
we'll give them. We're going to give them the card at the end and that. And I remind you, I'm sorry we're running out of time, but I remind you, it's been your pleasure to have the Perception 2 people involved in the anti-media bias campaign. And that's on my far left is Tiffany Devitt of the Fair, and on my immediate left is Simone Farkhondeh with Paper Tiger. Happy to be able to bring you those perceptions. We invite you to tune in again next week. We'll be coming back next week on Conversations. That's it for this particular segment. Ladies, once again, thank you very, very much. Thanks for all your work, and thanks very much for coming in. Good night. We'll see you next week.
Like your father should have.